I stood in the driveway clutching a box of my eviction belongings, watching my parents gift my sister a brand new car just days after telling me they were too broke to keep me. The Texas sun hammered down on the cracked concrete of our driveway in Plano, intensifying the headache that had been throbbing behind my eyes since breakfast. It was 90 degrees in the shade, but I felt a distinct, shivering cold radiating from the center of my chest. In my hands, I held a recycled liquor store box, the cardboard flaps folded over each other to keep my life from spilling out onto the pavement. Inside were my framed diploma, a stack of marketing textbooks, 3 pairs of shoes, and a framed photo of my grandmother, Ruth. Everything else I owned was already stuffed into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan parked on the street, safely out of the frame of the video my father was currently recording. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Brianna screamed, her voice cracking with a theatrical hysteria that set my teeth on edge. She jumped up and down, her professionally done box braids bouncing around her shoulders, her hands covering her mouth in feigned disbelief. She stood in front of a cherry-red compact SUV. It wasn't a luxury vehicle, but it was brand new. The paint was flawless, gleaming under the harsh midday light. A massive red bow, clearly purchased from a party supply store, sat squarely on the hood. The engine was running, a quiet, expensive hum that sounded nothing like the rattle of my own car. "It's yours, baby girl." My dad, Robert, shouted from behind his iPhone. He was panning the camera dramatically, catching the glint of the sun on the chrome, then swinging back to Brianna's tear-streaked face. He didn't pan the camera to the left. If he had, he would have captured me, his 24-year-old daughter, standing like a ghost in the background, holding the box that marked my expulsion from the family home. My mother, Linda, stood by the driver's side door, clapping her hands together, a beatific smile plastered on her face. "You deserve it, Bree. You've been working so hard on finding your path." I tightened my grip on the cardboard box until my knuckles turned ash gray. Finding her path? Brianna had flunked out of community college twice in 3 years. Her path currently consisted of sleeping until noon, watching makeup tutorials at full volume in the living room, and leaving her dishes in the sink for the house elves, which usually meant me to clean up. Just 2 weeks ago, sat at the very kitchen table I had just wiped down for the last time. These same 2 parents had looked me in the eye, with somber, practiced expressions. "Natalie," my mother had said, reaching for my hand but not quite touching it. "We're really struggling right now. The inflation, your father's hours getting cut. It's just too much. We can't afford to support a 3rd adult in this house anymore. We need you to start paying market rate rent, or you need to find somewhere else." I hadn't argued. I never argued. I was the good one, the independent one. I worked 2 jobs, one as a junior marketing associate in downtown Dallas, another freelancing copy on weekends, and I had paid off my student loans 6 months ago. I bought my own groceries. I paid my share of the utilities. But apparently, my existence was the financial burden breaking the family bank. So, I agreed to leave. I found a friend, Tasha, in Oak Cliff, who said I could crash on her couch for a few weeks while I hunted for an apartment I could afford. I packed my life into boxes without a single tantrum. And this was my send-off. "Go on, sit in it," Dad urged, stepping closer to get the perfect angle for Facebook. Brianna shrieked again, ripped the door open, and threw herself into the driver's seat. The smell of new car leather wafted out a sharp, chemical scent that smelled like money. Money they didn't have for me. Money they claimed didn't exist when I offered to pay a few hundred in rent but couldn't match the market rate of a 1-bedroom apartment immediately. I watched my mother lean in the window, stroking Brianna's hair. "We wanted to make sure you were safe getting to your interviews," she cooed. Interviews. Right. Brianna hadn't been to a job interview since she was 16. I took a step forward, the gravel crunching under my boots. The sound was loud in the heavy air, but no one turned. It was as if I were wearing an invisibility cloak woven from their indifference. "I'm heading out," I said. My voice came out steady, devoid of the tremor I felt in my gut. Dad didn't lower the phone. He just waved a hand distractedly in my direction, his eyes glued to the screen, ensuring the framing of the red bow was just right. "All right, Nat. Drive safe. Don't be a stranger." "Bye, Natalie," Mom chirped, not looking away from Brianna, who was now busy syncing her phone to the car's Bluetooth. "Text us when you get settled." "Love you too," I whispered to the air, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. I walked down the driveway, the heat radiating off the asphalt burning through the soles of my shoes. I reached my car, my reliable, dented, high-mileage sedan that I had bought with my own tips from waiting tables during college, and popped the trunk. I shoved the box inside, slamming the lid harder than necessary. Through the rear window of my car, I watched them. They looked like a commercial for the perfect American family. The doting parents, the ecstatic daughter, the shiny reward for a job well done. It was a tableau of happiness that relied entirely on my exclusion. I unlocked my door and slid into the driver's seat. The air inside was stifling, baking hot. I gripped the steering wheel, my fingernails digging into the worn cover. I wanted to scream. I wanted to roll down the window and shout, "You just told me you were broke. You just kicked me out because of money." But I didn't. That was the old Natalie. The Natalie who thought if she just worked hard enough, if she was just good enough, they would finally look at her the way they looked at Brianna. I started the engine. It sputtered once, then roared to life. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw my dad lowering his phone. He was already typing, undoubtedly crafting the caption. I could see it in my mind's eye. "So proud of our girl. She deserves the world." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry for them. Not anymore. They thought they had all the power. They thought they held the keys to the kingdom, deciding who stayed and who went, who got the red bow and who got the cardboard box. They thought this was the end of the scene. They were wrong. As I turned the corner, leaving 1427 Willow Bend Drive in my rearview mirror, my hand brushed against the side pocket of my purse, sitting on the passenger seat. Inside, tucked into a small velvet pouch, was a set of keys they knew nothing about. They didn't know about Grandma Ruth. They didn't know about the lawyer. And they certainly didn't know who actually owned the roof they were currently celebrating under. Karma doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers. And as I merged onto the highway, heading toward a future they had tried to sabotage, I realized that the loudest sound in the world isn't a sister screaming over a new car. It's the silence of a woman who holds the deed. Have you ever felt like the black sheep simply because you were the responsible one? Have you ever watched the people who were supposed to protect you sacrifice your well-being to enable someone else's bad behavior? It's a pain that changes you, but sometimes, that pain is just fuel for what comes next. If you've ever had to smile while your heart was breaking, or if you're just here to see a toxic family get exactly what they deserve, smash that like button, subscribe, and comment, "I'm watching from your city below so I know who is riding shotgun with me on this revenge tour." Let's see who is really listening. The drive to Oak Cliff took 45 minutes, time I spent listening to a podcast about financial independence just to drown out the replay of my sister's screams in my head. When I finally dragged my box up the 2 flights of stairs to Tasha's apartment, I was sweating and exhausted. Tasha, my best friend since freshman year orientation, didn't just open the door. She threw it open and pulled me into a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and sage. "I hate them," she said, pulling back to grab the box from my hands. "I legitimately hate them, Nat. Tell me you cursed them out. Tell me you slashed a tire." I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto her beige love seat. "I didn't slash anything. I just left." Tasha set the box down on her coffee table and immediately pulled out her phone. "I saw the post, by the way. Your dad accepted my friend request last year just to spy on us. Remember? I saw the video." She turned the screen toward me. There it was. The video had been up for an hour and already had 50 likes. My dad's caption, "So proud of our girl. She deserves the world," burned into my retinas. The comments were a stream of validation from relatives who hadn't seen us in years. "Great parents," wrote Aunt Linda. "Brianna looks so happy," wrote a cousin who is currently in jail. "They kick you out for being too expensive, and then drop 20 grand on a car for the one who can't keep a job at a smoothie shop." Tasha fumed, pacing the small living room. "Make it make sense, Natalie." "It doesn't make sense, Tash. It never has." I reached into my purse and pulled out the velvet pouch I'd fingered earlier. I set it on the table next to the box of my reject belongings. Tasha stopped pacing. She looked at the pouch, then at me. "What is that?" "Insurance," I said softly. I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. 3 years ago, the hospice room in Amarillo smelled like antiseptic and dying flowers. My parents had visited Grandma Ruth exactly once, staying for 20 minutes before complaining about the drive. Brianna hadn't come at all. But I had been there. I had held Ruth's hand when the morphine made her lucid. I had brought the lawyer in when she asked, acting as a witness while my parents were at a scorching brunch in Dallas. "They think they won," I told Tasha, opening my eyes. They think they just trimmed the fat from the budget so they can focus their resources on Brianna. They think they own that house. Don't they? Tasha asked, sitting down next to me. Technically, no. I picked up the pouch and loosened the drawstrings. A heavy, brass key slid out, along with a silver USB drive. Grandma Ruth didn't trust them, I whispered. She knew Dad was bad with money. She knew Mom enabled Brianna. When the will was read, they were so busy arguing about the jewelry that they didn't listen to the clause about the real estate. They heard trust and management and tuned out. They signed the papers the lawyer gave them, thinking it was just a formality to keep the deed in the family name. Natalie, Tasha said, her eyes widening. What are you saying? I'm saying they signed a lease, Tasha. They think they're paying the mortgage to the bank like usual. But the mortgage was paid off by the estate 2 years ago. I tapped the USB drive. They're paying me. Tasha's jaw dropped. You're their landlord? Through an LLC the lawyer set up. Anonymous. They have no idea. Just then, my phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. It wasn't a text from my parents, or an apology. It was an automated notification from the property management software I had installed on my phone months ago, an app I rarely checked because I had set everything to autopay. I picked it up, and the blood ran cold in my veins. Alert. Payment failed. Insufficient funds. Tenant. Robert and Linda Brooks. Status. 30 days past due. I looked at Tasha, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. They bought the car with the rent money, I said. And they just violated the lease. You have to be kidding me, Tasha gasped, staring at the red notification on my phone screen. They skipped the rent to buy the car? That is a special kind of stupid. Nat. It's not stupid to them, I said, my voice eerily calm as I tapped the screen to open the admin portal of my LLC. Willow Bend Holdings. It's calculation. They think banks are slow. They think foreclosure takes years. They think they can skip a month or two, dazzle the neighbors with the new car, and catch up later. I pressed a button on the interface. Send notice of delinquency. What did you just do? I just automated a very polite, very legal email to my father informing him that he has 5 days to cure the default or face eviction proceedings, I said, setting the phone down. Now we wait. The wait didn't take long. 3 hours later, while Tasha and I were eating takeout pizza, my personal phone lit up. It was my mother. Hey sweetie, hope the move went well. We miss you already. Listen, tiny favor, Dad's direct deposit is acting funny. Do you think you could spot us $800? Just for a few days. Love you. I read the text out loud. Tasha nearly choked on her pepperoni. The audacity. They kick you out. Buy a car. Don't pay their rent. And then ask the homeless daughter for money? I typed back. Can't. Had to pay a deposit on a new place since I was asked to leave. Budget is tight. I didn't block them. I needed the line open. Over the next 3 months, I settled into a rhythm. I found a small studio apartment downtown that I could actually afford. I excelled at work, channeling my rage into productivity, and I watched my parents from a distance via the Willow Bend Holdings dashboard. They paid the first late fee. Then they missed the next month entirely. They sent partial payments. They were juggling, robbing Peter to pay Paul, all while posting photos of Brianna, cruising, in her red SUV. My house was falling into disrepair. A drive-by inspection revealed the lawn was overgrown. They were letting things slide. But I held back. I was building a case. The trust clause Grandma Ruth wrote was specific. Gross negligence or failure to maintain financial standing could trigger an immediate removal of the beneficiaries. I was patient. I was the cold one, remember? Then came the night in November. I was asleep in my new apartment, finally feeling safe, when my phone began to buzz incessantly on the nightstand. It vibrated against the wood like an angry hornet. 1:47 a.m. I groaned, rolling over. My screen showed 6 missed calls, all from my dad, then 3 from my mom. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. Despite everything, the instinct to worry was hardwired. I sat up and swiped the green button on the 7th call. Hello? Natalie. It wasn't my dad. It was my mom. And she wasn't just crying. She was wailing. It was a guttural, terrifying sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. You need to come. You need to come now. What happened? Is it Dad? It's the car. She choked out, her voice rising to a shriek. Brianna. Oh God. There was ice on the overpass. The car is gone, Natalie. It's just gone. Is Brianna okay? I asked, gripping the sheets. She's in surgery, Mom sobbed. But Natalie, the police are asking for insurance papers, and we don't have them. I felt the blood drain from my face, not out of fear, but out of realization. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had snapped their legs. What do you mean you don't have them? I asked. We let the policy lapse last week to pay the water bill, she whispered. We need money, Nat. We need a lot of money, or they're going to arrest your father. Parkland Hospital at 3 a.m. was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and hushed conversations. When I walked into the waiting room, the first thing I saw was my mother's face, puffy, streaked with mascara, and aged 10 years since I last saw her. She rushed at me the moment I stepped through the sliding doors, wrapping her arms around me. It was a suffocating, desperate hug. Thank God, she whispered against my neck. Thank God you came. My father was pacing near the vending machines, looking smaller than I remembered. He was still wearing his pajamas under a trench coat. He didn't hug me. He just nodded, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected a SWAT team to burst in. How is she? I asked, pulling away from my mother. She's out of surgery, Mom sniffled, wiping her nose with a crumpled tissue. Broken femur, 3 fractured ribs, and a concussion. But the doctors say she'll walk again. Daughter so. And the other driver? Dad stopped pacing. He looked at me, his face gray. Whiplash, minor cuts, but the car. Natalie, she hit a brand new S-Class. Totaled it. I let out a low whistle. And without insurance. They're coming for us, Dad interrupted, his voice shaking. The other driver's insurance company. The police impounded the wreckage. They're talking about negligence charges because the registration on the SUV was expired too. I didn't have the money to renew it last month. I stared at him. You bought a $25,000 car? But you didn't pay the $60 for registration? Or the premium for insurance? We were going to, Mom interjected defensively. We were just waiting for Dad's bonus. There is no bonus, Linda, Dad snapped, finally cracking. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Look, we don't have time for a lecture, Natalie. We need cash. Right now. We need $10,000 just to get a lawyer to stop them from detaining me for the unpaid warrants. And probably another $10,000 for the hospital deductible. Unpaid warrants? I asked, my eyebrows raising. Speeding tickets, he mumbled. A lot of them. Look, it doesn't matter. We need $20,000. Tonight. I don't have $20,000 lying around, I said calmly. We know you have savings, Mom said, her voice turning wheedling. We know you didn't spend all your money on that apartment. You've always been the saver. That's my emergency fund, I said. For my emergencies. This is a family emergency, Dad hissed, stepping closer. And we're good for it, Nat. We're not asking for a handout. It's a bridge loan. A bridge to what? To the house, Dad said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of Plano. We're going to list the house on Monday. Market is hot. We'll sell it, downsize to a condo, and pay you back double. We just need the cash now to keep the wolves at bay until the sale closes. I felt the air leave the room. It was the moment I had been waiting for, yet hearing it out loud felt surreal. They were so confident, so sure that the brick-and-mortar safety net they had neglected for years was theirs to cash in. You're going to sell the house? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. We have to, Mom sobbed. It's the only asset we have left. We'll sell 1,427 Willow Bend and fix this mess. I reached into my bag. My hand brushed past my wallet and closed around the folded copy of a document I had started carrying with me weeks ago. Just in case. You can't sell the house, Dad, I said. He blinked, confused by my tone. Of course we can. It's our house. No, I said, pulling the paper out and unfolding it under the harsh hospital lights. It's not. What are you talking about? He squinted at the document in my hand. What is that? It's the deed, I said, holding it up so he could read the bold print at the top. And you might want to look at the line where it lists the owner of record. Dad leaned in, his eyes scanning the paper. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. Natalie Brooks, he read, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horror that had nothing to do with the car accident. What did you do? My mother snatched the paper from my father's trembling hands, her eyes scanning the legal text frantically. "This isn't real," she spat, looking up at me with a mixture of fear and fury. "You printed this off the internet. It's a prank. A sick, twisted prank while your sister is lying in a hospital bed." "It's a certified copy of the deed, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Recorded 3 years ago. The original is in a safe deposit box at Chase, along with Grandma Ruth's will." "Grandma Ruth?" Dad repeated, the name sounding foreign in his mouth. My mother was senile. She didn't know what she was doing. You must have coerced her. You manipulated a dying woman. I was the only one there." I raised my voice, finally letting a fraction of my anger show. People in the waiting room turned to look, but I didn't care. When she was scared, I was there. When she couldn't feed herself, I was there. You two were too busy with brunch and golf. Brianna was finding herself. Ruth knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted the house to go to someone who wouldn't squander it. "It's our inheritance," Mom shrieked, crumpling the paper in her fist. "We are her son and daughter-in-law. That house is worth $500,000. You stole it from us." "I didn't steal anything. I accepted a gift you were too arrogant to notice was missing." Dad's eyes narrowed, a new realization dawning behind them. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. "Wait a minute. If you own the house, and we've been paying rent to Willow Bend Holdings," he stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Have we been paying you rent? When you actually managed to pay it?" "Yes." I didn't back down. "And that market rate you insisted I pay before kicking me out?" "You've been getting a discount. I charged you 20% below market value because, despite everything, I still felt sorry for you." "You little witch," Mom hissed, lunging forward as if to slap me. Dad caught her arm, holding her back, but his face was twisted with disgust. "You let us struggle? You let us panic about bills while you sat on a paid-off house and collected our money?" "I let you live in my house," I corrected. "I let you stay there, even though you treated me like a tenant in my childhood home. I saved that money for you for an emergency, like this one." "Then give it to us," Dad demanded. "Give us the rent money back so we can fix this mess with the police." "No," I said. "That money is in a trust now. It's not for bail. It's not for lawsuits." "Then we'll sue you," Dad said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "We will contest the will. We'll prove undue influence. We'll drag you through court until you don't have a dime left, Natalie. We will take that house back, and we will leave you with nothing." I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't grieving parents. They were cornered predators. They were ready to destroy their responsible daughter to save their own skins. "I expected you to say that," I said, reaching into my bag one last time. "Which brings us to the part of Grandma Ruth's will that you guys skipped over at the reading." I pulled out a second document, highlighted in neon yellow. "Go ahead, sue me," I said, holding the paper up. "But you might want to read the no contest clause first, because if you file a single motion against me, you're going to trigger something you can't stop." "What are you talking about?" Dad snapped. "Read it," I whispered. "But be careful. Once you know what it says, you can't unknow it." My father snatched the paper, his eyes squinting against the harsh hospital lighting. I watched his lips move as he read the highlighted paragraph, the color draining from his face until he looked like he might faint. "What does it say, Robert?" my mother demanded, clutching his arm. "Read it." He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. It says if any beneficiary contests the validity of this will, or attempts to harass, sue, or impede the executor in the discharge of their duties." He swallowed hard. "Their entire portion of the residual estate, along with any rights to personal property, shall be immediately forfeited." "Forfeited to who?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. "To the Safe Haven Women's Shelter in Fort Worth," I finished for him. "In honor of Ruth's sister, who had to run away from a husband just like you, Dad." The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the vending machine seemed to roar in the quiet. "She planned this," Mom whispered, horror dawning on her. "She knew we would try to fight it." "She knew you," I corrected. "She knew that the moment you found out the money wasn't yours, you'd try to burn it all down. So she installed a sprinkler system." I took the paper back from my father's limp hand and folded it neatly. "So, here are your options. You can sue me, lose everything, and explain to Brianna why her inheritance is going to charity. Or, you can figure out how to pay for your own mistakes tonight without my help. You can't leave us here, Mom cried, tears spilling over again. They're going to arrest your father. The other driver's insurance is not my problem, I said, slinging my purse over my shoulder. I suggest you sell the jewelry you inherited. Or maybe return that 75-inch TV you bought last month. But do not call me for money again. And do not miss next month's rent. If you do, eviction proceedings start immediately. I turned on my heel and walked out of the waiting room. I didn't look back at the sound of my mother sobbing or my father cursing. I walked through the automatic doors into the humid Texas night, took a deep breath of air that didn't smell like antiseptic, and felt lighter than I had in years. I thought I had won. I thought the nuclear option of the trust clause had scared them into submission. For 2 weeks, it seemed like I was right. The radio silence was blissful. I went to work, I hung out with Tasha, and I even started looking at new furniture for my apartment. I assumed my parents were busy scrambling to pay off the damages from the accident, perhaps finally learning the lesson Grandma Ruth had tried to teach them from the grave. But rats don't leave a sinking ship quietly. They just find a different hole to chew through. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk reviewing ad copy when the receptionist, Jessica, walked over with a grim look on her face. "Natalie?" she said, holding out a thick, rigid envelope. "This just came for you. You had to sign for it. But the courier said it was urgent legal correspondence, so I signed on your behalf." My stomach dropped. It was a certified letter. The return address wasn't my parents'. It was a law firm, Halloway and Associates Tenant Advocacy Group. I tore open the tab with a shaking finger. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It wasn't a contest of the will. It was something far more insidious. "Dear Miss Brooks, we represent your tenants, Robert and Linda Brooks. Please be advised that under Texas Property Code, your attempts to intimidate our clients regarding their rightful residency at 1427 Willow Bend Drive constitute harassment. Furthermore, due to their documented financial contributions to the household over the last 20 years, they are asserting a claim of equitable title and lifetime tenancy. You have 48 hours to cease all eviction threats, or we will file for an emergency injunction to block your access to the property indefinitely." I stared at the letter, the paper shaking in my hands. They weren't fighting the will. They were trying to steal the house from the inside out. I stormed into Mr. Henderson's office 40 minutes later. The letter crumpled in my fist like a weapon. Mr. Henderson? The same silver-haired attorney who had helped Grandma Ruth set up the trust, didn't look worried. He adjusted his glasses, read the letter from Halloway and Associates, and then, to my absolute shock, he chuckled. "Is something funny?" I asked, my voice tight. "They're trying to steal the house. They're trying to bluff Natalie," Henderson said, tossing the letter onto his mahogany desk. "And they're doing a terrible job of it. Equitable title is a claim used when someone pays the mortgage and taxes on a property for years without a deed, acting as the owner. But your parents signed a lease." He pulled a file from his drawer and tapped a document. "The moment they signed this residential lease agreement with Willow Bend Holdings 3 years ago, they legally acknowledged they were tenants. They admitted they didn't own the property. This letter is garbage. Whoever gave them this advice is either incompetent or just taking their money." I felt the tension in my shoulders loosen, but the anger remained. "So we fight it?" "We don't need to fight it. I'll send a response attaching the lease they signed. Their lawyer will likely drop them before the ink is dry to avoid a malpractice suit." Henderson leaned back, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "But, while preparing for the eviction filing due to their non-payment of rent, I ran a standard asset and liability check on your parents. Standard procedure, to see if they're collectible. And I found out why they're so desperate for cash," Henderson said. "It's not just the car accident." He slid a second sheet of paper across the desk. It was a credit report. Highlighted in red was a massive outstanding debt. "The Meridian at Legacy," I read aloud. "That's a luxury apartment complex near the community college." "Correct. It appears your parents co-signed a lease for Brianna there 6 months ago. A 2-bedroom unit with a pool view." "Brianna doesn't live there," I said, confused. "She lives at home. She's always at home. Apparently she used it as a study retreat, or perhaps a party pad," Henderson said dryly. "But here's the kicker. Rent hasn't been paid in 4 months. The complex has already filed for eviction and a judgment for back rent. Since Brianna has no income, they are going after the co-signers." My parents, I realized. Exactly. And because they ignored the certified letters from the apartment complex, probably too busy scheming against you, the process server has been authorized to serve them in person. Henderson looked at his watch. In fact, according to the court docket, the server is scheduled to visit their primary residence, your house, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. A cold, hard smile formed on my lips. My parents were so busy trying to claim a house they didn't own that they had completely forgotten about the apartment they did legally vouch for. They have no idea this is coming, do they? I asked. None, Henderson confirmed. They think they're on the offensive. They don't know they're about to get hit from the flank. I stood up, grabbing my purse. Where are you going? Henderson asked. To watch, I said. I have a house to inspect, don't I? I think tomorrow morning is the perfect time for a landlord visit. Natalie, Henderson warned gently. Don't interfere. I won't say a word, I promised, heading for the door. I just want to be there when the red bow finally falls off. But as I walked to the elevator, I didn't realize that my parents had one last, desperate card to play, one that involved the only thing I had left at that house that I actually cared about. I parked my car 2 houses down, shielded by the sprawling oak tree of a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years. It was 8:50 a.m. The process server was due in 10 minutes. But as I peered through my sunglasses at the house, my house, I realized something was wrong. A beat-up white van was backed into the driveway, its rear doors thrown wide open. On the side, in peeling blue vinyl letters, it read, Dallas, Cash for Antiques and Estates. My heart hammered against my ribs. I watched as my father emerged from the front door. He was struggling with a heavy wooden crate, his face red with exertion. My mother followed, carrying a stack of flat, velvet-lined boxes. I knew those boxes. They contained Grandma Ruth's sterling silver service for 12. It was a wedding gift from her parents in 1948, hand-engraved, and worth easily $10,000. It was specifically listed in the will as my personal property, left in the house for safekeeping because my apartment didn't have a secure place for it. They were liquidating my inheritance to pay for the lawyer they hired to steal my house. Hey! I screamed. Forgetting the plan. Forgetting the process server. Forgetting everything but the violation unfolding in front of me. I sprinted across the lawn. Put that down! Dad froze, the crate teetering in his arms. The guy from the antique van, a burly man with a clipboard, looked up, confused. Natalie? Mom clutched the velvet boxes to her chest. Get off this property. You received the letter from our attorney. You can't be here. That letter is garbage and you know it. I reached the driveway. Breathless. That silver is mine. It's in the will. If you sell it, you're committing theft. It's abandoned property, Dad shouted, regaining his balance. You left it here for 3 years. We have the right to liquidate assets to cover the distress you've caused this family. Distress? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You're selling my grandmother's legacy to pay for a lawsuit you're going to lose. We're not going to lose. Mom stepped forward, her eyes manic. We have rights, we are tenants, and you are harassing us. I'm not harassing you, I'm stopping a robbery. I turned to the antique dealer. Sir, if you buy that, I will have you arrested for receiving stolen goods. I have the probate documents on my phone right now. The dealer's eyes widened. He took a step back, closing his folder. Look, folks, I don't want any trouble. I'm out. Wait! Dad yelled, desperation cracking his voice. Don't listen to her, she's crazy. But the dealer was already hopping into the driver's seat. He slammed the door and reversed out of the driveway, leaving my parents standing there with boxes of silver they couldn't eat and couldn't spend. You ruin everything, Mom shrieked, throwing the velvet boxes onto the concrete. The sound of expensive silver clattering against the driveway was sickening. You are evil. We needed that money. No, a deep voice interrupted from the sidewalk. You're going to need a lot more than that. We all turned. A man in a plain gray polo shirt was walking up the driveway. He held a thick stack of papers. Robert and Linda Brooks? He asked. Is this from her? Dad pointed a shaking finger at me. Is this the eviction? Not from her, the server said, shoving the papers into Dad's chest. This is from the Meridian at Legacy. You're being sued for $14,000 in back rent and damages for Unit 4B. Dad looked at the papers, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color drained from his face. The The apartment? Brianna's apartment, I clarified, crossing my arms. The one you co-signed for. The one you forgot about while you were busy trying to steal mine. Mom looked like she was going to be sick. The fight went out of her shoulders. But then, a siren wailed. A Plano police cruiser turned the corner, lights flashing silently in the morning sun. It pulled up right to the curb, blocking the driveway. I frowned. Did you call the cops on the antique guy? Mom looked up. A slow, poisonous smile spread across her tear-stained face. It was the look of a woman who knew the ship was sinking but had decided to drill a hole in the lifeboat, too. No, she whispered. I called them on you. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their hands resting near their belts. Mom pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. Officer, she screamed, summoning tears instantly. That's her. That's the woman who broke into our home and threatened us. We have a restraining order pending. I want her arrested. The younger of the 2 officers, a woman with a severe ponytail and a skeptical expression, stepped forward. Her hand hovered near her taser. Ma'am, I need you to step away from the homeowners, she commanded, her eyes locked on me. She's crazy, Mom wailed, clinging to my father, who was still clutching the eviction papers for Brianna's apartment like a shield. She broke into the garage. She was trying to attack us because we wouldn't give her money. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. For a second, I felt the old panic rise, the childhood fear that no matter what I said, their version of the truth would be the only one that mattered. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't a tenant. Officer, I said slowly, keeping my hands visible. My name is Natalie Brooks. I am not breaking in. This is my property. Liar, Dad shouted. She's our daughter, but she's estranged. We have a lease. You had a lease, I corrected, my voice cutting through the humid morning air like a knife. You defaulted on it months ago. I turned to the officer. I am the owner of record for 1427 Willow Bend Drive. I have the deed, the probate court order, and my identification right here. I gestured to my purse on the hood of my car. These people are my tenants. They haven't paid rent in 90 days. And I just caught them attempting to sell items from the home that are legally listed as my personal property in my grandmother's will. The officer paused. She looked from my hysterical mother to my sweating father, then back to me. ID, she said simply. I handed it over, along with the folded deed I had shown my father at the hospital. The officer took it, walking back to her cruiser to run the check. The silence that stretched across the lawn was suffocating. The neighbors were watching from their windows. The process server was still standing there, looking awkward. Mom stopped crying abruptly. She stared at the police car, her face blotchy. They won't believe you, she hissed at me. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Not when you signed a contract, Mom, I said coldly. The officer returned 2 minutes later. Her demeanor had completely changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a business-like rigidity. Miss Brooks, she said, handing me back my ID. Everything checks out. You are the legal owner. She turned to my parents. Folks, this is a civil matter regarding the eviction. But if you don't have a protective order, which the system says you don't, you can't trespass the owner from her own land. But she threatened us. Mom tried again, though her voice wavered. I didn't threaten anyone, I said. I stopped a theft. I pointed to the velvet boxes scattered on the driveway. Officer, those boxes contain antique sterling silver. My inheritance. They were loading them into a van to sell them for cash when I arrived. The officer walked over and nudged one of the open boxes with her boot. The morning sun glinted off the tarnished silver forks inside. She looked at the empty crate my father was holding. Then she looked at the cash for estates flyer that had fallen out of his pocket. The situation clicked into place for her. She turned to face my parents, hooking her thumbs into her belt. The air on the driveway suddenly felt very thin. Sir, ma'am, the officer said, her voice dropping an octave. Selling property that doesn't belong to you isn't a civil dispute. That's a felony. She turned back to me, pulling a notepad from her pocket. Miss Brooks, she asked, do you want to press charges? My parents froze. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine, unadulterated terror in their eyes. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother looked at me, her face crumbling, silently pleading for the mercy she had never once shown me. I looked at the silver. I looked at the house. Then I looked at them. Actually, I said, I have a better idea. I won't press charges, I told the officer, watching the relief wash over my parents' faces, relief that was premature. On one condition. I turned to my father. You hand over the keys. Right now. You sign a voluntary surrender of the property. Effective immediately. You take what you can fit in a taxi. And you leave. If you do that, I won't file the felony theft report. If you refuse, or if you try to take one single item that isn't yours, I'll let the officer cuff you. Dad looked at the officer. She nodded, her face stony. It's a generous offer, sir, given the alternative is a ride downtown. He didn't argue. He didn't scream. The fight had finally, completely left him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the house key, the one I had given him 3 years ago under the guise of him being the master of his domain. He dropped it into my open palm. It felt heavy, cold, and final. The next hour was a blur of frantic, humiliating activity. My parents packed clothes into garbage bags. They left the furniture. They left the TV. They left the memories. The officer stayed to ensure the peace was kept, leaning against her cruiser while my mother wept silently, stuffing her jewelry box into a tote bag. I watched from the sidewalk. I didn't help. When the taxi arrived, they looked like refugees of their own making. My dad tried to say something as he opened the cab door, maybe an apology, maybe a curse, but I turned my back before he could get the words out. I heard the door slam, and the taxi pull away. Silence descended on 1427 Willow Bend Drive. I walked up the driveway, past the oil stain where the red SUV had been, past the cracks in the concrete where I had stood with my cardboard box just months ago. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled like them, like my dad's cologne and my mom's potpourri. But underneath that, it smelled like dust and neglect. I walked through the rooms, the silence echoing around me. I found the silver service on the floor of the entryway where my mother had dropped it. I picked up a fork, wiped a smudge of dirt from the handle, and placed it back in its velvet box. Safe. I didn't move back in. I couldn't. The house held too many ghosts. Instead, I hired a cleaning crew the next day. I fixed the roof. I painted the walls a color my mother would have hated. And then, true to Grandma Ruth's spirit, I rented it to a young family who needed a break at a fair price. Brianna recovered, physically at least. Without the car, without the apartment, and without parents who could fund her delusions, she had to get a job waiting tables. I heard through Tasha she's finally taking classes seriously. My parents live in a small one-bedroom apartment near the highway now. They text me sometimes, usually on holidays. Sometimes it's a guilt trip about how small their kitchen is. Sometimes it's a demand for family time. Often, it's just a thinking of you. I never reply. Every time I drive past that driveway in Plano to check on my tenants, I don't feel anger anymore. I remember the red bow. I remember the laughter. I remember how sure they were that they held the reins. But mostly, I remember the weight of that key in my hand. The house taught me the lesson they refused to learn. Love is an action, not a transaction. And power? Power isn't about screaming the loudest or driving the shiniest car. Sometimes, power is just a piece of paper in a safety deposit box, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when it finally does, it has the last word.